Welcome. Welcome to Partnership Live, our monthly discussion with leaders in healthcare who are reshaping New Jersey. I'm Marie Carl Vilsius-Talty, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Kevin Cox, who is our program supervisor for our Fellows program. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm Marie Carl. How you doing?
I'm good, and I'm so happy that you are with us today. We like to start it pretty light and airy before we get into like real tough questions, which there'll be none. But you know, the pandemic has brought a lot of things to light. People have found newfound talents that they had tucked away, you know, who's gardening, who picked up a guitar, or who decided to completely, you know, change their profession and change course. Is there anything in particular you found out during the pandemic that you would change, or something specific you would be doing if you weren't doing what you're doing now?
Well, things I would change definitely. In the pandemic, I realized I learned a lot about myself, especially in terms of me being very particular and liking to be organized. So with the chaos of the pandemic, it really taught me to be prepared for anything and that you can't plan for everything. So that unexpected factor I had to get a little bit better with.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. Anything that you would think of doing as opposed to what you're doing now? Any hidden talents, or would you change course, or would you still be in the same profession?
Hidden talents, no. I think I definitely would be in the same profession. I've just have a passion for social work, especially in the area that I'm in. Essex County is real dear to my heart. So I always saw myself in some capacity, on some level, you know, doing something that helps people in this area.
That's really wonderful. So in addition to your work at the partnership, I know that you wear another hat. You want to share that with us?
Yes, I'm also a adjunct professor at Essex County College. I teach courses in English and history, although as of recent, history's been my biggest focus. So now I'm teaching courses in African American history, U.S. history, and also world civilization.
That must be challenging and very interesting to hear the amount of education, or lack therefore, of the people that you're teaching now, especially U.S. history and African American history, you said, right? What are those conversations like in the classroom? Is there anything that's really astonishing you of our educational system, what people know about African American history or don't know?
Well, there's a lot that they don't know. I mean, there's a baseline that people get, I guess, before they get to the higher education level. But it's astonishing the amount of history that they don't know. And it's so intertwined and connected. African American history and U.S. history go hand in hand. So there's a lot of nuances that are discussed at length that you know, people may have glossed over or not even known about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when they talk about critical race theory, does that come up in your classes at all?
More towards the end of the class, in our African American history class, but it's kind of more of a primitive understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, you know, we really see how African American history is, as I said, kind of linked and tied into U.S. history. So a lot of times the classes are intertwined. There's even times during the semester where I join both of the classes for certain segments.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of connection between the history of African Americans here in the U.S. that, you know, dates even predates the enslavement period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it must be real. It is interesting that this year, Juneteenth and Father's Day fell, you know, on the same day, and you teaching African American history and U.S. history, and how the idea of the Black man as absentee parent, or not being in the home, or just not being involved at all in that social dynamic of families. I'm sure there's a huge history component that goes into that. Can you share some of the insights of how that myth and that narrative began and how it's being propagated?
It's funny. That's one of the interesting topics of my African-American history class, one of the things that a lot of people, even African-American people, didn't really know. They really didn't understand where that myth came from. It's based in the slimmest of truth, but there is some truth to it, but there's also a lot of other dynamics that played into it that people just weren't aware of. Like, for example, the first truth of that initial myth would date all the way back to the enslavement period. So with African Americans in their history or their first insertion into the Americas was under slavery, and in doing so, African American families were not legalized; they were not legitimized. So oftentimes, because they weren't respected, slave owners and slave masters of the time would have no problem splitting those families apart for profit. So one of the main reasons why African American males were taken from their family had to do with their ability or the assumption that they could provide maximum labor. So men would kind of be the first choice or the first pick among slaves. And oftentimes, again, they wouldn't respect that some of these men were husbands or fathers. And they would sell them to the highest bidder. And a lot of times the highest bidder was quite some distance from their families. So that's the first aspect that's the myth or the slim truth of the myth is based in. There's another component to that that's an intentional factor where African American men were split from their families because it assisted slave owners and slave masters at that time in having more control over their other slaves. Removing a dominant male, removing the head of the household, so to speak, allowed slave owners to have more control over the others, less resistance. So that was another reason African American men were intentionally separated from their families. And then coming to the conclusion of the enslavement period is where we find the last truth of that myth, which is as slavery now is abolished and as it legally now becomes outlawed, it left a lot of African American families in a immediate predicament. When they were free, a lot of African American men had to figure out how to provide for themselves, their wives, and their children. So at that time, to secure work, a lot of African Americans would have to travel again some distances away from their families. Some reported as even being two states or more over.
Wow.
So in having to work such a great distance, obviously they're not going to be able to travel back and forth. And then the conditions that they worked under, they traveled great distances to secure these jobs, and these jobs are hazardous. So a lot of these men, either didn't make enough to travel home or it made just enough to send home so their families could get by. And some of those men, became ill and died without having the opportunity to return to their families. The sad part about that is instead of these men being considered heroes and the heroism of that sacrifice being highlighted, it was replaced with this myth that they didn't want to be around. And they just left their families, to suffer in their absence. So a lot of times, again, that myth in particular of the absentee father, again, there is some truth to it. And, when we look at statistics, it is a legitimate factor. But the history that's ingrained and embedded behind it, that compelled with systematic racism, also accounts for the ramifications of it and why things are in the conditions they are today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. But I'd like to keep on that topic with systematic racism. And when we look at the CDC research and the census research, we'll see that like 2.7 million families are intact Black families. And then you have about 1 million or so that the fathers are not in the home. And that narrative becomes, since they're not in the home, they're not in the child's lives and they're not part of the family system. So unfortunately, that narrative continues. But how has systematic racism impacted the Black men and Black fathers?
Oh, well, uh, in a lot of different ways. And if we're talking Black men in general, the ramifications of systemic racism, are almost immeasurable. From the fact that it breeds poverty, that a lot of these men have to suffer through with their families if they remain. But the fact that the systemic racism and the conditions created by it will force some of these men to commit criminal acts just to carve out a meager survival. When they're caught for those acts, and when their luck runs out and they're incarcerated, the sentencing, as we've seen throughout history, has been somewhat unfair. So they're incarcerated for longer times. Regardless of incarceration, we also have a history of systemic racism limiting the ability of Black men to get substantial employment, whether they have a criminal history or not. There's just been, noted reported difficulties. And then in terms of participation in and with government, that's also limited. So it has profound effects on Black men, but in terms of Black fathers, it limits every aspect of them being able to be a father.
Right.
I remember growing up, I was taught the responsibility of a man, the responsibility of a father is to protect and provide, to maintain and sustain. Systemic racism hinders a father's ability, especially a Black father's ability, to do all of those things.
Right, right. And then when you have some people who could be economically vulnerable and disadvantaged, that the way that the welfare system was set up, the father could not be in the home, and they would have visits where they drop by and they see fathers in the homes, or they see someone, a significant other in the home, and then their benefits would be cut. So the system has been set up systematically to destroy that and to promulgate that myth. But you and this wonderful program, Fellas, is really working to change that narrative. Tell us more about Fellas and the great work that you're doing.
Well, Fellas is a needed program, especially in this Essex County area. Fellas, which stands for Fathers Empowered to Learn, Lead, and Achieve Success, is again a program that aims to assist fathers in the area that are over the age of 18, that have a child anywhere from the stages of birth all the way to the age of 24 years old. We don't limit or restrict fathers that are coming into any capacity. So you don't just have to be a biological father. We'll, take stepfathers, grandfathers, anybody that fulfills a fatherly role or capacity to an identifiable child in their family is welcome to join the Fellas Fatherhood program. And we really just aim to have our fathers have more of an impact in the lives of their children, first and foremost, but then also their families and their local communities. We have a unique way of doing so. We have some group discussions, we have individual discussions that open our dads up to some new ideas and some unfamiliar ones. And we really work with our fathers in teaching them to be goal-oriented, identifying certain goals, and showing them how to achieve and accomplish those goals.
That it's really a great program. So it's really combating the myth of the minorities, that the men are either not there, deadbeat dads, they're worthless. Can you give us some examples of the successes that you've had?
Well, we've had a lot of successes, especially in combating those myths, because that's one of our goals. We've had a couple of fathers who have battled through not just the struggles of whatever their predicaments were, whether it was child custody or developing a better relationship with their child, but realizing that systemic racism, played a factor in it as well. So we've had fathers that have successfully learned to navigate through that system, even with the hardships that they face. And like I said, we've had a number of our fathers win full custody of their children. Those that may have been in a downtrodden position before are now able to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and be in a position where they can be valued as a man and as a father. And Fellas has, we've been up and running not that long, but we have quite a few success stories. A lot of different fathers, but a lot of different fathers with different individual situations. But the biggest success stories for us are fathers who come back to the program after completing, come back and want to help out and introducing it to others, whether joining us for our recruitment stages, or fathers that bring along a new member and want to be active in signing them up for the program, want to sit in those first couple of sessions so that another father can get the same experience or similar one that they had. So Fellas is doing some pretty special work.
Yeah, they're really changing the lives of not only that family, but in general, the community. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship building, not only with the child, but what about the significant other who may not be together or they're still an intact family?
Well, we have one specific component of our program, one of our curriculums that tackles and deals with communication in general for our fathers, really starting with the factor of listening and the different listening styles and what to listen for. But the program, or that portion of the program, is tailored and designed for the father to be able to go through it with the mother of his child, whether they're romantically involved or not. So again, we're not miracle workers. We don't try to solve their problems in a therapy session.
Right.
What we really aim to do is just give both parties communication skills and to be able to recognize certain cues, to realize when things are getting to an emotional level and it may be time to pull back, and also to recognize when it's time to just listen a little bit more attentively to what the other person is saying. And we find a lot of times that improved communication improves the relationship. It helps them be able to co-parent in the instances where they're co-parenting a lot better.
Right.
We've also had some situations where it's improved the romantic relationship as well. Being able to listen and to communicate improve the initial bond between the mother and the father.
Yes, absolutely. Because getting people to share in general is challenging, but if we want to be stereotypical, getting men to share is not always easy. So how do you engage the dads who may be, kind of skeptical of being in the program?
Well, we get a lot of those. We get a lot of guys who are hesitant, who are skeptical, and I really have to give the credit in kind of breaking that skepticism to our fatherhood program specialists. We have a great team of 5 guys that really, again, seek to do more than just pass out resources and do more than just sign guys up for a program and have them sit in particular sessions or group settings. Our fatherhood program specialists desire to really have an effectful change in the lives of each father that they deal with. Some of the more successful methods they have in kind of breaking the skepticism or the hesitancy is a lot to do with their initial approach. Unlike a lot of other programs that I've experienced myself, one of the things our fatherhood program specialists pride themselves in doing is not assuming. They don't meet a father and automatically assume, I know what they need, or I know which resource you can benefit from. So because of that, again, our FPSs or our program specialists themselves pride themselves on the ability to listen. They form a bond with these fathers initially, which is hard to do. And they're individually and uniquely skilled at doing so. Each program specialist has his own style, but they form an initial bond and relationship with the father.
Mhm.
And then they don't take a position, an initial position of judgment.
Mhm.
So they really start from a perspective of, is there a need for help and how can I do so?
Mhm.
And then the next step for them is listening. Instead of assuming that they know, they listen to what the father thinks he needs. And again, they sit together and formulate a plan, and they work towards the goals that'll benefit that father.
Mhm.
So a lot of times, uh, that interaction is what really breaks the initial hesitancy and skepticism.
Mhm.
And that interaction a lot of times from RFPS is initiated with a simple conversation.
Mhm.
Usually starts off with them saying, "Hey, are you a dad?" And they take it from there.
Yeah, that's really important. Learning those communication skills and learning how to listen and not respond, but to listen, to comprehend and really understand what people need is really a skill. So you're very lucky to have that great team of guys. You're very
Thank
lucky.
you. Thank you. They're doing
So
good work.
yes, I know. We're very proud of the program and the work that you're doing. What's one of the most important lessons you've learned from the Fellows Program?
Um, One of the most important lessons I learned from the program, from interacting with our program specialists and our fathers, sitting in on a couple of sessions, is that no matter what the downtrodden position of any man may be at the point they encounter fellas, none of the men that we have encountered, not one of them, has had a desire to negatively impact their children.
Mhm.
Not one man in his right mind that we have encountered expressed that they had an intention to destroy their family, to harm their children, to not want the best for their children.
Mhm.
And for us, that's always a starting point, no matter where you are in life. So that's one of the things I've learned from this program, is that, we may have a lot of fathers in a lot of different socioeconomic positions, a lot of different personal predicaments, but they all have good intentions, and they all can be adequate fathers if they're not when we first meet.
That's really wonderful. It really is a great program, and you're doing a really great job getting us back on track, and most importantly, changing that narrative, cleaning it up, making sure people know what's happening, and how, of course, fathers are important. They need to be there, but everyone needs to learn how to be a father, right? And needs to learn how to communicate. So that's really, really important. Great work. I know we're getting to our time, but I just have a couple more questions. So we all know about getting working with the partnership and what a great organization we are. So what surprised you the most? Because we usually deal with women and children all the time. So having this fellows program and highlighting fathers within the partnership, because we know dads are extremely important, but within our moniker and within the things that we do every day, we always talk about maternal child, maternal child. So what's surprised you the most of working with the partnership?
Well, with the partnership, I think the biggest surprise for me, especially because I've worked in a lot of different organizations that aim to help people. The biggest surprise for me was that everyone I met within their respective positions really believed in the work that they were doing.
Mhm.
And that's a rarity that you find in social work. Not everyone is willing to advance the ship forward. So the fact that, almost everyone I met in their respective positions really wanted to affect change from whatever that position was,
Mhm.
it was surprising. And then the freedom that the partnership gives them to do so. Obviously with work, there are certain limitations, but everyone is empowered to go after their goals. Everyone is empowered to do something to really help the population that they're focused on. It was surprising, but it was also refreshing.
That's great to hear. I know in speaking with you, you had a really interesting conversation with someone who gave you a tip about what you should do in life. So the best advice that you ever received. You want to share that with us?
The best advice that I ever received, and it was actually a tip I received a long time ago from the father of one of my college roommates. He told me that no matter what you do in life, it's okay to be a good thief. And it puzzled me when he said it, but he went on to explain, in being a good thief, you have to be observant. You're stealing information, and it's okay to do so, especially in advancing your career or the work that you do. You can learn or steal from everyone around you. You can learn from good experiences, you can learn from failures, you can learn from advice, but learn or steal as much information as you can. So I think that was the best advice that I got.
Absolutely. Very, very important. So with our time ending here, I love talking to you. Our time ending here, what's a positive takeaway that you have living through the pandemic that we could take and move forward with?
Living through the pandemic, which was pretty difficult. Positive takeaway I have is, not to plan as much, to be prepared for the unpredictable. That's something I definitely learned during that time, and life's been a little bit less stressful when I, tried to embrace that concept.
It is very important to be malleable, without a doubt. Yes, yes, indeed. Those are really great takeaways, and I will definitely learn to be more of a thief and borrow information. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining me, telling us a little bit about the history of the narrative of the Black father and helping to change that narrative with the Fellows Program. I think that you're really doing great work, and I'd like to commend you for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you next time on Partnership Live.